Hey guys, what's up? This is Brett. Welcome to a new episode of Friday on the Turntable. So I've gotten a few comments over the last couple months, people saying, why do you just talk about the records? Why don't you actually play some of the music? Well, there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, if I play music from these albums, there's going to be copyright restrictions coming on. Some countries won't be able to see this video, and etc. And number two, we live in the digital age. It's very easy to go up on YouTube where we're already at, open up another window, click on type in the name of a song or the album that I'm listening to, go to Spotify, go to iTunes. We have so much music at our immediate disposal. So that's the reason why I don't really play anything. Because it's very accessible and you guys can check it out. My whole purpose of talking about these albums is hopefully to inspire you guys to check them out further. I love giving some history and details on some of my favorite recordings or various, offshoots of these that I do. Like last week I did favorite EPs. Sometimes I'll do ranking videos. So it's more to give you guys some background and a talk on these albums. Imagine we're in music school here talking, instead of talking about chemistry or whatever, we're talking about these cool albums. So that's the point of these videos, and thanks for watching. So today, Roxy Music, their debut album from 1972, that's what I'm talking about. And let's talk about 1972 first. What a killer year for music, 1972. I'm going to show you 5 albums that also came out in 1972, just to give you an idea of what else was going on that year. So here we go. T-Rex, The Slider. Man, what an album. The cover on this one is credited to Ringo Starr, and it's notorious that actually it was Tony Visconti, who produced the record, was the actual photographer of it. But T-Rex, The Slider, iconic Mark Bolan cover with the hat on, and man, Metal Guru, Telegram Sandwich Bauhaus went on and covered. Yeah, what a record. 1972, Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street, their double record recorded in France. Wow, Rocks Off, the opening track on that one. Killer. R.I.P. Lou Reed. Transformer actually put out 2 albums in 1972, his debut, and then a short while later put out what probably his most popular solo album, Transformer. Home to Walk on the Wild Side. Got a segue. I mean, we're covering the quote-unquote glam rock classics here. T-Rex, Lou Reed, and then you have to show David Bowie, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. What a killer record, 1972. Wow. And lastly, 1972, we got to put a little metal in there. Early metal, Black Sabbath's 4th album, Volume 4. Supernaut, what a great track. Snowblind, yeah. So there's 5 records which also came out the year of Roxy Music's debut album from 1972. This actually came out on June 16th of 1972, and the band really formed just about a year before it. Roxy Music, UK band. They were a 6-piece on this album, and they had such a unique blend of instruments in their they had saxophone, oboe, the guitars. This is back when Brian Eno was in the band, and the guitars were in the sax, and the instruments were treated through Brian Eno's processing, which gave them a really bizarre sound. You have Brian Ferries, who was the singer of Roxy Music, with a really bizarre vocal presence. He had just what I consider just the most quickest vibrato, where his voice would just shake intentionally so fast. And just a very unique vocal personality. Yeah, so this was their debut album, and it was one of 2 albums to feature Brian Eno, as I mentioned before. Their second album, For Your Pleasure, was the last one to feature Brian Eno. And yeah, a couple days ago, I was involved in, there was a little poll on Facebook and people asking about their favorite Roxy Music album, and I was really surprised because the majority of people picked their last album, Avalon, which for me, the later period of Roxy Music is actually, while I do like it all, their later period is actually my least favorite. My favorite Roxy Music are actually these 2 albums right here. This was the first one that I ever picked up on CD back, and I'm going to guess it was in the early 90s. And I remember that day clearly because my brother and I went to the record store. And I just remember going to lunch afterwards. Not that you care about that, but I just remember having that CD sitting there on the table and then going home and then immediately being struck by the kind of bizarreness of the music and falling in love with the track 2HB, which is To Humphrey Bogart. And whenever I hear that song, it always takes me back to that day. Yeah, so anyways, the album was produced by a guy named Peter Sinfield, and he's kind of interesting because he was one of the founding members of what became King Crimson. And he wasn't really a singer or anything, but what he was a lyric writer, and he wrote the lyrics for their first 4 albums in the Court of the Crimson King. And he did a lot of their lighting and all kinds of involvement and artwork and all design and all kinds of stuff. But he actually was enlisted to produce this album, which he did, and the album is fantastic. And let me show you the artwork for this one. This is actually a reissue that came out on Virgin, and it comes on a heavy 180 gram vinyl. And I'll show you this. It has the band member pictures, which I remember being so small on the CD, but you can see all the guys there. You got with the sunglasses there. You got Phil Manzanera on guitar, Brian Eno, Brian Ferry over there with the leopard, and what is that? Andrew McKay, Paul Thompson on drums, and he later went on to actually play in Concrete Blonde. And then you have Graham Simpson on bass, and I think he left shortly after this. But and then this edition also comes with a big poster of the artwork. I won't open that all up, but I do want to mention that the actual cover model on this was Carrie Ann Mueller, who later went on to marry Mick Jagger's younger brother Chris. And she also, you can kind of tell maybe with the eyeshadow, but she was actually the cover model on Mott The Hoople's The Hoople album. So whether or not you can see that, the blue eyeshadow. But yeah, I guess I never knew that until I did some research today, but still cool little piece of information there. Alright, so there wasn't even a single for this album. What's interesting is when it was originally released in the UK, it didn't include the track Virginia Plain. It wasn't even recorded, I don't think, at the time of the release, so it was a single that came out as a non-album single a couple months after the album's release, and then it was attached onto the later issues of the album. But I've only known the album with Virginia Plain in the sequencing as track 4 on side 1, and it's such a great piece of music. Their songs have been covered by so many artists. When I look through it, I think If There Is Something, which is one of my favorite tracks in this album. If you're familiar with Bowie's Tin Machine, the album he did with Reeves Gabrels and the Salas Brothers, they did a great cover of If There Is Something. And that's another one of the tracks that immediately grabbed onto me when I first listened to it, because it's such a interesting song, because it starts off as almost like this kind of rolling country rock, and then it just slowly morphs and it gets really serious and it gets really emotional. And Brian Ferry's vocal performance is great. The harmonized soloing, which has that processing on it, and it kind of swoops in and out, and it's just a really cool song. Ladytron is the second track, which the French band Ladytron ended up naming themselves after. Sea Breezes, which Susie and the Banshees did a cover of. Bitter's End, which I think, if you guys remember, there's a movie that came out in the late 90s called Velvet Goldmine, which was loosely based on the life and career of David Bowie and Iggy Pop, Mark Bolan, Brian Ferry, actually. Placebo, if I remember correctly, does a cover of that. But for the soundtrack, they assembled a bunch of musicians like Bernard Butler from Suede, Tom York from Radiohead, and there's a version of 2HB on there with Tom York of Radiohead singing that. But to describe the sound of Roxy music is kind of difficult, especially in the early years. So if you're familiar with the song More Than This, which is a phenomenal phenomenal song from their last album, Avalon. Their earlier stuff was really quirky, experimental, sometimes really beautiful, sometimes really avant-garde and just quirky, and definitely worth checking out. Now, I never got to see the band because I think their last album came out in 81 or 82, so you know, they were long broke up. You know, I was still pretty young back then. But in 2001, they did reunite for a tour, and I remember I couldn't go. I don't think they came to Phoenix, but I remember being on tour with my band, Audra, and I remember being in Long Beach, and I think it was either the same night we were playing or the night after they were playing in Los Angeles. So I never actually did get to see them play, and I think they've reunited since then. I don't know, I'd have to look that up, but yeah, how cool would that be if they got back together with Brian Eno and put it back together and see what happens. But like I said, these first two Roxy Music albums are definitely my two favorite ones. So I think I'll leave it at that for today, guys. So Roxy Music, I'll have a link down in the description box where you can check it out if you want to you know, research the album a little bit more. I'll have a link to my blog. Maybe I'll put up a little playlist and stuff. So yeah, that wraps it up. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you soon.